What is up? What is up, everybody? It's the Vish Kumaran show. I'm Vish Kumaran. That's Larry Krueger. Wishing everybody a happy Valentine's Day. As you can see, Vish doesn't have a lot going on Valentine's Day, and Larry's married with 4 kids. So he's, I guess, taking Valentine's Day off this year. So
No,
we're
I
here
did the
streaming.
card. I already did the card.
You did the card?
I did the card. I wrote the card. I picked out the card weeks ago. My wife likes that chocolate, those chocolate bars that just taste terrible. Those they're like 98% dark chocolate or 85% whatever. I mean, that you see them at the grocery store. It's like chocolate that's so dark that it's not even sweet. It's
Bitter?
like almost bitter. She
Yeah.
likes that kind of
Ugh.
chocolate. Yeah.
Hey.
So got her
That's
some
quite an
chocolate.
acquired taste.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Got her a
I'm
card.
I'm solely milk chocolate. How about you?
Um, I like milk. I'd rather have milk chocolate than dark chocolate, but if I like dark chocolate, if it's just dark chocolate, but it's like a Milky Way dark or something like that, where it's still
Okay.
sweet. But when you get to these Ghirardelli bars where it's like it says like 92% or 88%. It's just it's not. No, I need something a little sweeter than that. I'm not a big chocolates guy myself.
Okay,
My
okay.
favorite candy, though, I would have to say, is chocolate. It's the 100 grand bar, 100 grand.
Okay. That's a solid choice. I was gonna
Yeah,
ask you, are you a big sweet tooth guy or
I can be. I like Swedish fish.
okay,
Uh,
so like
I,
Shanahan.
yeah. So you like Swedish fish?
Yeah, I remember a couple years ago on Halloween, they asked him, they were like, "Are you gonna be going trick or treating or getting candy or whatever?" And he was like, "I might steal some Swedish fish from my kids." So
There you go. He's got good. He's got good taste in candy, man. The Swedish fish is it's a fine candy.
it's a fine candy. I see.
Fine
I see.
candy.
That's the proper way to describe it.
It's an enjoyable treat.
It's a delicacy.
It's a winner. Winner, winner. So what are we talking
I'm
about today, man? I've been talking all day, man. I'm a talking fool today.
Yeah, I mean, so we're entering kind of the weirdest part of, in my opinion, the off season because you're kind of pivoting. You're trying to figure out what exactly teams are going to do over the off season. You don't have a lot of clarity on who they're really planning to bring back or anything like that because teams are kind of locked up right now and figuring out stuff with their staffs and stuff like that. So why don't we start with the 49ers staff?
Okay.
Since the last time you and I talked, right? You and I talked, I think, last Friday on or Thursday on your channel. And since then, Bobby Slowick has been now hired by Houston. I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of different people, right? The easy answer is everybody goes, it doesn't matter. That's what everybody says. It doesn't matter. But Larry, I actually have a differing opinion. I don't say whether it matters or it doesn't matter because I don't have an accurate ability to be able to describe what Bobby Slowick's role is within this offense. And I do think as long as the mastermind is there, Shanahan, everything will be okay. But I think we take for granted the lack of continuity, the opportunity now to have to teach Brian Fleury to take on the role that Bobby Slowick did. Just the pivoting in the staff, the kind of changes it does, the time it takes for teams to get a little bit of a rhythm doing that. We've seen that a little bit over the last couple of years as the 49ers have had a lot of recycling within their offensive staff, especially last year. So Larry, I haven't been able to hear your thoughts on it. What's your thoughts on the departure of Bobby Slowick? How do you think they replace him? And ultimately, do you think this is going to be a big deal for the 49ers moving forward?
I think they're screwed. I think they're totally screwed. They're probably going to be sub 500 next year. I don't know if they'll score at all. No, I don't think it's that big a deal. I really don't.
Okay.
Um, it's not that it doesn't. It's not a big deal, but it's still Kyle's offense.
Right.
Kyle's offense produces points. There's coaching turnover on good staffs every year. The same to some degree. The same way there's always player turnover to good rosters year to year, and it's not always a bad thing. Relationships grow stale. You every year is singular unto itself. coaches have bad years the way players have bad years. Coaches have life distractions the way all of us have life distractions. So, and coaches get old and ineffective the same way that anybody at any job gets old and
Yep.
ineffective. So, don't, I would say this, don't fear change. And just know that you have to evaluate what you see on the field and try to learn as much as you can about the value of these coaches and look for the changes year to year. And it would be nice if the 49ers made their coaches more available, then you could kind of ask
Right.
a few more questions. You would have a better idea of, if the schemes change and how much they change from year to year. But I think what you're seeing here is generally a theme, which is teams are consistently taking assistance from Kyle Shanahan's coaching staff because one, they hire really, really good people and his offense works and
Right.
produces points. Um,
Right.
and then the interesting trend to me though, Vish, is the fact that Fleury, coached tight ends. He's been with the Niners for 4 years, but if you look at it, this guy's coached, quality control.
He's
Um,
coached defense.
he's coached defense. He was a Browns defensive assistant when Shanahan was the OC there in 2014. So, I mean, I think that's really interesting that teams are now, are willing to let coaches kind of go back and forth. We're seeing it with Belichick and Patricia. And I don't know if that it worked all that well, but at least Patricia we think of as a defensive coach. He was on the offensive side of the ball this year, and their offense kind of regressed. Was it because of him? I don't know, but I do think that's an interesting trend that you're seeing. The guy that one of the guys that the 49ers were going to take from the Commanders, the young defensive coach, was
Chris
potentially going to
Harris.
be their defensive coordinator. He has a job with the Titans, I believe, as an offensive coach, trying to prep them for defensive wrinkles that they'll see. So now you're seeing offensive staffs take defensive coaches to try to figure out a way to have an advantage. I think it's really interesting. But as far as I don't know anything about the job that Bobby Slowick did or how the competency of Brian Fleury, the tight end coach. Couldn't speak to any of that, but I will say it's as long as Kyle's there, I think 49er fans should feel reasonably confident that that the meat and potatoes of the scheme will remain the same.
Absolutely. And you touched on a lot there that I want to kind of go over. And I do have a little bit of pushback for you.
Go for it.
So I agree. I like that you brought up the Patricia example. And I think the Flurry defense example here is very important, right? Because I predicted, I think on your show actually with you, that once this Bobby Slowick to Houston thing started, that Flurry thought would be the coach that moved up because he was Shanahan's quality control in 2019. And you look at the progression for all the other guys who've been his quality control, whether it's Matt LaFleur, Mike McDaniel, all these different guys who have eventually moved up to being coordinators. In fact, I think Bobby Slowick was his quality control as well. I think he was the first one in 2017, I want to say. And so Fleury was kind of the next guy in that progression. And it's important to me that he started off on defense because Shanahan talks always about his roots, right? He talks about how he started as an offensive quality or defensive quality control in Tampa Bay. And he learned defense from Monty Kiffin and Mike Tomlin and Gus Bradley and that entire staff of Joe Barry, fantastic defensive coaches in Tampa Bay, and how it helped him learn the rules of defense. And if you watch Shanahan, the best thing his offense does is it stresses out the rules of a defense, right? And it goes back to his understanding of defense. So I think that defensive background point is very important when we're talking about Brian Fleury and his potential and all of that, because, he has the background that Shanahan covets, the background he has. Now, where I push back with you, Larry, and I'm glad you brought up that New England example, because I think the New England retread aspect of it, not exactly the example you brought up of Patricia moving from the defensive end to the offensive end, but Belichick's preference to go with Patricia is to me why we should have a conversation about the 49ers losing Bobby Slowick. Belichick went to Patricia, right? And the reports were that it was basically because he was sick of keeping on losing these offensive coaches and having so much turnover in his staff. And those two guys, Patricia and Judge, are comfortable with the Patriot way, right? They're comfortable with how they do things. He doesn't have to coach the philosophy or coach the system to them. They know how the Patriot way works, and they know how they communicate with the players and what message Belichick wants to communicate with the players. And I think finding somebody else to do that, Larry, not Bobby, is where I think there is not necessarily a point of conflict, but a point of conversation for us to have, because the lack of continuity to me does make a difference. They relied upon Bobby Slowick to be their passing game coordinator. So they put some level of responsibility on Bobby Slowick, and Shanahan clearly trusted him to do that job. Now you're going to have to find somebody else to do that. And we saw at the beginning of this year, right? Chris Forrester talked about the little things Shanahan used to be able to trust Mike McDaniel for, that they had to slowly replace what he does and find different people to do the different roles. Similarly, I think they will have to find a little bit of a replacement for Bobby Slowick. Now, I don't know if that's necessarily going to be quote unquote difficult, because it starts with Shanahan, and he does an awesome job of hiring and coaching his coaches to deliver his message and coach his players the way he wants to. But I do think it's not necessarily a no nothing, the 49ers just move on, because I think then we're taking for granted Shanahan's special skill, which is hiring and developing these coaches. He's really, really good at it. It's not necessarily easy to go through this much turnover year after year after year in your staff and continue to compete the way they do.
Yeah, I mean, these guys, I mean, as far as how much impact will be felt here, when D'Amico was hired by the Texans, and, Kyle said, hey, D'Amico and I will sit down and we'll talk about, who's going with him and who's staying
Right.
here. So sometimes you get the feeling that it's somewhat of a negotiation. But, the 49er, Bobby Slowick is in his 9th year in the NFL, 3rd season with the Niners this year. And he was stepped into the passing game coordinator just this year after spending the previous 2 seasons as the offensive passing game specialist.
So, Larry, not to interrupt you,
Yeah.
but I don't think that point exactly works here, because in Slowick's case, it's actually an upgrade. So the 49ers can't block him in any capacity because he's going from not calling plays to calling plays in a coordinator position. So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, comment section, I think he's allowed to move freely if he's able to get the job. But with Corey Unlin, I think that exact example you brought up would be a point of conversation, because I think he had the same pass game coordinator role with the 49ers and DB coach, and I think he's resuming that same role with Houston. Correct me if I'm wrong. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but yeah.
No, I was just going to say that, I don't know about the competency of Fleury versus Slowick, what they'll lose with Slowick, what they're gaining with Fleury. I do know that Shanahan's had a number of coaches hired off his staffs, and I think it's because they hire some really good coaches. And then they have a lot of success. And I think also there's a belief that his scheme, which he's coaching, works.
Right.
But you never know. You never know about somebody until you actually work with them. You don't know their work habits. You don't know how hard they work. You don't know their standards. So, I'm sure it's more than anything the same way offensive football is about continuity, offensive, staffs are about continuity. So continuity is important. I didn't mean to say that it wasn't. I hope that's not the way it came across. I'm just saying that Slowick, to have a young player, a young coach promoted off your staff is not uncommon. And I think the key component is Shanahan when it comes to the offense, for everything that's to be done on the offensive side. He does have some real veteran coaches, though. I mean, Slowick's was one of the younger ones.
Guys.
Chris Forrester, has been around for a long time.
Bobby T.
Brian Schneider, the special teams coach, is, basically, entered the NFL in 2007 or something like that. It's been Anthony Lynn. Brian Greasy is a relatively young coach, but obviously he had a whole full career. So Fleury's in his 4th year with the Niners. But he's got a varied background. I do think it's interesting. So when I say varied, I mean he's a tight ends coach. He was offensive quality control. He was defensive quality control. He was a research analyst. He was the director of football research for the Dolphins. So I'm sure he's a very bright guy, and we'll see. I mean, ultimately, you got Shanahan there, and Shanahan knows as long as he's there, it's his responsibility.
Absolutely. And I think that's kind of the summation, right? I mean, we've talked about Bobby Slowick for probably longer than Bobby Slowick has been talked about all season now. But I think that is really the summation. While I do think that, in a sense, they will have to find a way to replace him. It's Shanahan's baby. Shanahan's ultimately the guy. As long as you have him, you would expect him to figure out this offense, no matter which coaches they lose. Not to diminish. Again, I feel like we do this every time the 49ers lose coaches. I feel like I just did it a week ago with D'Amico Ryans. It's not to diminish how smart these guys are, their contributions. It's just that ultimately the 49ers, the buck stops with Kyle Shanahan. He's the really special guy. And as long as he's there, I feel like a lot of good things remain. And our buddy MF is asking me if I'm doing some draft prep. I am actually. Been a little busy at work the last couple of days, so I haven't been able to, but I'll be up at 5 a.m. Central tomorrow getting ready for that stuff and doing it. If you want to join me, MF. Larry will be.
You're getting up at 5 a.m. for draft prep?
5:30 usually. I usually get. Why not? I have it. So I don't know about you, but my process takes a little bit longer because I take usually the draft time. Also, I mean, so kind of a small like side note, and I think you'll be able to appreciate this conversation in general. But I kind of take the off season always to learn more about football, right? Learn more X's and O's, watch more coaching clinics, and learn more. And the funny part of every one of these off seasons is I'm technically learning. And the one thing I always realize I'm learning is how little I know about the sport of football. These coaches, when you hear them talk and when you hear them explain things and explain certain things and how they scheme certain things, it's incredible how many different things they know. So for me, draft prep takes longer because I don't just take the time to watch a specific player. I try to learn a little bit. If I'm watching Kentucky, right? What are the things they do to their offense? That's what I'm watching right now. And obviously, there's a lot of carryover there. So there's a lot of Shanahan stuff that we're able to see with Will Levis. That's who I'm watching currently. I like him, Larry. I do. I don't know if you've seen him.
Yeah.
He's kind of a polarizing prospect, but I actually kind of like Will Levis.
Oh, yeah. No, he's a terrific prospect. Strong arm. Physically, he's what you're looking for.
Absolutely. He's the prototype across the board.
Yeah. I think there's a very good chance he goes 1.
You think so?
Yeah,
Really?
I do.
Really? Okay. You think the Bears will move off Justin Fields, or do you think that would be we're gonna trade the pick and somebody else is gonna come and get? Okay.
I think I think Indy could very well trade to number 1, and it's just a matter of, do they want C.J. Stroud? Do they want Bryce Young? Do they want Will Levis? But I think when they really, right now, you're still close to the season. But I think by the time it comes around, I bet you Levis goes 1. Like the mock that I'm looking at has Bryce going 2, Stroud going 4th, and Levis going 11th, and Anthony Richardson going 26th, with 4 quarterbacks going in the first round. But I actually think that Levis is going to go 1.
Okay, there's the Larry Krueger February number 1 overall pick, Valentine's prediction.
Valentine's prediction.
I think it's so fluid though, right? I'm assuming that by March it could be somebody different just based on what's getting reported, all of that. But I do think if there is a quarterback that's going to shoot up during draft time, just because he is a complicated watch. Like I'm watching his 2022 right now, and yeah, it was rough, but it's hard to just put it all on the quarterback when the offense is not very good. Rick Scangarillo did not do a good job. The protection isn't great, and they're kind of overwhelmed in terms of talent in the SEC. Kentucky is not Alabama or even Tennessee or Florida. They're kind of overmatched across the board there. So I wouldn't be surprised if he shoots up during draft time. But Paul Perryman asks an interesting question, Larry. He says, There's an argument to be made. Shanahan is a much better play designer than play caller. What do you think of this?
Well, um, what you're really talking about is play calling versus play sequencing. Like,
Yeah.
that's what you're really talking, because the play caller and the designer is technically the same thing. He
Yeah.
designs the plays, then it just comes down to what situations does he use them in. And that's a huge part of being an elite play caller. I mean, I think you saw Andy Reid's greatness on full display on Super Bowl Sunday. He had the short motion.
Right.
The
Right.
Eagles did not adjust. They got a busted play. He ran it back 15 minutes later because he knew that in the midst of a Super Bowl game that there's very few adjustments they could really make. They're not going to
Right.
have a meeting about a play in the middle of the game. They can't.
Right.
So he ran it back at them, and they were in the same way they botched it the first time, they botched it the second time. And he
Right.
got
And
2 busted play touchdowns in the Super Bowl. And that's why Andy Reid is an incredible play caller and designer. But yeah, I think Shanahan, I always differentiate between play caller designer versus like quarterback coach or quarterback guru. Like, just because Kyle Shanahan is I think a very good play caller, a ruthless play caller, and an outstanding play sequencer. I think he knows exactly how to not just call plays, but how to set them
right.
up. That but when people say, "Oh, well, then he should be able to, develop Trey Lance," well, maybe, maybe not. We're going to find out. We're going to find out
Yeah.
if that
So
it's a different skill set.
yeah, I think that there's two things you hit on, and I think the second part actually opens the door to a larger conversation about Shanahan. I've seen this point before, and I kind of want to just put a foot through this point because it doesn't actually make sense if you parse the words, right? So this idea of play design, right? I think there's this impression at times that a lot of these offensive coaches are just reinventing the wheel, right? Like Andy Reid has 55 plays in his offense that nobody else in the NFL has. They can't even think of, they can't even heard of. The bottom line is a lot of the stuff offenses do actually translate across the board. They have a lot of similar concepts, right? They have they might now package them differently. They might have the quarterback progress through them differently. They might run it a little bit differently against different looks, but a lot of pass concepts are pretty consistent, right? Coming back from, either the West Coast offense or the air raid, or they take inspiration from one of these, major pass schemes, whatever. What makes Shanahan's scheme and play designs, quote unquote, so fantastic is what you described, right? It's the way he sequences it, the way he's able to put plays together to set up things to force defenses' hands, and then he's able to stress your rules out as a defense because he's forced you to play something a certain way because he's done this and he's called this 3 times, and now he calls that, which is the perfect counter to how you countered this. And that's really Shanahan's brilliance as a play caller. And I thought you summed it up perfectly. So this argument that he's a better play designer, quote unquote, than a play caller, that doesn't make sense to me because his play design brilliance stems from his ability to sequence plays together. Now, the second part of your argument about the quarterback side of it, I do think is completely different, right? I think scouting the quarterback and being able to teach the quarterback how to play and stuff is probably the hardest thing to do. Probably when it comes to coaching in football. That's why I feel like so many different coaches are recycled. You're just hoping you have one guy who has a relationship with the quarterback. Now, the one thing Shanahan has proven to me is that he's able to maximize his quarterbacks, right? He's able, if you have a proven set skill set, which means you can process his offense, you can get in and out of the huddle, and you can throw the ball on time with accuracy. Look at the numbers Matt Schaub put up. Look at the numbers Matt Ryan put up. Look at the numbers Brian Hoyer put up. Look at the numbers Jimmy Garoppolo put up. Look at the numbers who's the Brock Purdy, put up, right? He's able to maximize all these guys who have this skill set. The latter part of the argument is what you described. We will find out because Trey Lance isn't necessarily there in doing all of those things yet. And we will find out if Shanahan ultimately is able to bring a quarterback to be able to play with timing and play without hesitation and be that comfortable within his offense. And that's a conversation that I don't know if he's actually had the opportunity to have until now because he's always been working with kind of the veteran quarterback and even the young quarterback he worked with this year for the longest period of time, which was the 8 games with Brock Purdy. Brock Purdy was a little veteranish, I would say, in a lot of his skills, Larry. I think you would agree with that in the way he saw the field, the way how comfortable he was in the offense, the way he played with timing, and how he played without hesitation. You don't usually see rookies operate an offense that way. And the maturity and poise he played with to not give the ball away as well. So we will see, because now he gets this golden opportunity with Purdy's kind of elbow situation and kind of return being up in the air. They don't have any other healthy quarterback on this roster. Lance is projected to be healthy. They get this golden opportunity to run it back one more time. So we'll be able to see. And I will also include this, Larry, before you go. I know I've been going for a long time. I just want to add this last point. If Lance doesn't develop, Larry, I don't know if it's fair to just say, oh, shoot, Shanahan can't develop quarterbacks either. Because if Lance doesn't develop, it might not necessarily be on Shanahan. It could be on other situations too, but it would be, I think, fair to cast a side eye until he ultimately either proves us right or wrong there. What are your thoughts on all of that?
Well, I mean, it's if he can't develop Trey, yeah, it won't be on Shanahan unless Trey goes somewhere else and develops.
Right.
Then it will be on Shanahan.
Right.
And then it will just be like, hey, Kyle, you didn't get it done where, who knows? Brian Daboll got it done, or whoever inherits Trey or gets Trey. So yeah, I mean, there's that for sure. I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly how the whole quarterback thing is going to go with the 49ers and Trey, but I think it is interesting that, they took two quarterbacks at the different ends of the spectrum. One played a ton and was like as proven gets at the college level, and the other barely played at all, but has these incredible traits that project to what we think is going to be a special talent. And it kind of screams, like, hey, we don't know what's going to work here, so we did both, right?
Yeah.
It's like, hey, do you get a experienced quarterback who's played a ton and has had success and don't worry about traits? Yeah, let's do that. Okay, that's Brock Purdy. Do you draft a super incredibly athletic, smart prospect with all kinds of great traits, but has no proven any kind of long-term proven track record?
Yeah.
Well, you know what? Yeah, let's try that. And so to me, it kind of just reveals that they really don't know not that they don't know what they're doing, but they really don't. It's all guesswork.
Can we go there? Can we go to that conversation?
They're just guessing.
Because the bottom line, I think, Larry, is this conversation is so interesting to me, especially around this time. It's because nobody knows. Everybody is trying to figure it out, right? Like, to me, Trey Lance going where he went. And if you go down my channel, there's a video, the one Mondays with Vish with Grant that we did on this episode. On this channel, the video is titled, and it was done during right after the COVID season when Josh Allen broke out, and it was how current NFL trends or how today's NFL is going to involve future trends. And two of the conversations we had in there was how Josh Allen was going to influence a lot of teams taking these, raw but athletically gifted prospects because you see this development and you think you can recreate it. And to some extent, Mahomes, though he was an outlier because from day one when he started playing, it was all pro. Best quarterback in the NFL. Bless you, Larry.
Thank you.
But and then the other thing we talked about was the move to Vic Fangio, two high structures. Both of those things happened. Not to pat myself on the back, but I'm just saying. But to move aside, Larry, I think that the bottom line is nobody knows. Nobody knows. And I think the point is that you can take an experienced guy, right, Larry? But there's not many experienced guys, no matter their experience, that walk into the NFL and as good as the talent was, as good as the situation was, as good as the system was, that play with the maturity, the confidence, the consistency that Brock Purdy played with this year. And you can take the raw guy too, right? And sometimes the raw guy is actually as raw as he is. And sometimes the raw guy plays 1 year of college football, is picked first overall, and he wins Rookie of the Year, scoring 35 touchdowns as a rookie, and they call him Cam Newton. So you can take the raw, physically athletic guy, and it could work out. So I think the bottom line here, Larry, and why this conversation is so intriguing is there's no resume to what makes an elite quarterback. And I was having this conversation just yesterday with a mutual friend, Rob Guerrero, right? He's relaunching his channel. Make sure you go subscribe, by the way, at Rob Guerrero. By the way, make sure you're liking and subscribing this video. Are you kidding me? Look at this content Larry Krueger is providing us. And subscribe to Mr. 14K there, but he's doubling me. So I can't be giving too many of you guys away to Larry. But jokes aside, like nobody knows. There's no particular resume, right? To me, what makes an elite quarterback is you have something elite about your game, and then you have an ability to mitigate whatever your flaw in your game is, right? Breeze, it was accuracy and timing and knowing the offense. Manning, it was pre-snap, right? Knowing where the defense is and knowing where it was to go with the football. Brady, it's his arm talent, pocket movement, accuracy, consistency, and then his poise, of course. Like all these guys have something elite about their game, and ultimately that's what I think it comes down to. And I want to go to another angle of this with you because I'm actually kind of sick of seeing this conversation, right? It always, when we talk about these two quarterbacks, it goes to ceiling. And we say, well, Trey Lance has this unlimited ceiling and Brock Purdy has this quote unquote limited ceiling. And I hate doing that because we don't actually know what the ceiling of these players is. I think the only difference between the two players is that Trey Lance has more parts of his game that have the opportunity to be elite, which if those parts of his game become elite, then he can be an elite player. To me, for Brock Purdy to become an elite player, the parts of his game that have to be elite is processing, timing, and accuracy. The other parts of his game, Larry, he's just not gifted enough where he can't become, this scrambler, strong arm, Josh Allen type quarterback who plays off schedule and plays just throwing the ball down the field. So I think that's the only difference between the two. Otherwise, to me, it's based on their own growth capacity, which none of us can quantify. That depends on where their ceiling is going to be, because we can put this infinite, unlimited ceiling on Trey Lance, but the ceiling is realistically what he can achieve, and none of us know that. And that's the same thing with Brock Purdy. So I know I went on for a lot there, but I do want to go to that last part of the conversation, Larry, which is the ceiling argument. Do you agree with me where the only difference really between the two in the ceiling is that Trey Lance has more parts of his game that have the opportunity to be elite? And it's not just that this Brock Purdy can only be this style of quarterback and Trey Lance is the only one that has the capacity to be elite.
I mean, it's hard to say who's gonna, who's got more potential and how they're gonna fulfill their potential. So many of the traits. I mean, the one thing, if you're gonna be good at anything, whether it's this or that, whether you're a football player or a quarterback, you have to work at it. So
Right.
some guys, and this is an old scout who told me this, and an old coach told me this one. Some guys are looking at their watch and it really bugs them that they're not at the facility. Some guys are looking at their watch and it really bugs them that they're still at the facility. You got to make sure you have the first and not the former, not the latter. You got to make sure you got a roster full of guys who are looking at their watch and they're like, I should be there already. Not the guy who's looking at his watch going, I should be out of here by now. So the hard work factor means a lot, because you're only going to improve if you work at it, and you're only going to work at it if you're only going to improve if you really put in the time. And what's your core work ethic? It has nothing to do with football. It's not a football drill. It's how hard you work. How important is football to you?
Right.
Show me somebody who's got a really awesome, well-developed, who's the greatest hitter of all time in baseball? If you listen to the old timers, they would say Ted Williams was the greatest hitter of all time.
Okay.
He was obsessed with hitting. Obsessed.
Right.
Barry Bonds, another guy, obsessed with hitting. Obsessed. So so maybe even dysfunctionally obsessed, but great hitter. I mean, Tony Gwynn.
Well,
obsessed.
Can I ask you this though, while you're mentioning him, because you were obviously there covering him. The only thing I've ever heard, and I'm not a big baseball fan, but what everybody constantly says when they talk about Barry Bonds is that he was the world's biggest jerk. Was he actually that much of a jerk?
No.
He wasn't?
No. I mean, he didn't want to do a lot of interviews, so he wasn't just, great. He wasn't giving of his time. Like, hey, you want my time here? Take it. No, he wasn't that way. But every time I ever asked him for an interview, I mean, and I did 3 interviews with him in his career. But every time I ever asked him, he would politely decline. I mean, there were guys who would just be like, swear at you. So I mean, no, I now Barry has a scowl, and Barry and so he's got his nonverbal is no. Some people's nonverbals like yes, approach me. His
Right.
nonverbals like don't approach me. So I think a lot of people were scared off by that, but I interviewed him 3 or 4 times, and almost every single time I was interviewing him, he was getting something out of it. Right? He was getting paid,
Right. Right.
or he was opening a donut shop or a bagel shop, I think, in the
Right. So he
peninsula
had to.
once. So he was, he had an agenda or something that he was pushing. So he wasn't, as I said, he wasn't giving of his time, but hardly the world's biggest jerk. I mean, I would say Jeff Kent was equally as hard to deal with, if not harder.
Coach T says that's very, by the way, interesting insight. This is why we love having you, Larry. Teach us about all the good old times
The
that
good old
maybe
days.
some of us, I mean, not even old days to be honest, but just days that, information that I might never be able to get from somebody else. Coach T, by the way, Coach T is a great guy on YouTube and on Twitter. I interact with him at, I want to say, I don't know his ad. I don't get it right, but he has some great, strong, excellent opinions. And of course he says Vish is exactly right. So why not put him on the screen? Am I right, Larry? No, I'm joking. But he said no one saw a leap from Brady. That status is born out of playing and proving it over time. And I think ultimately that's the biggest point with these quarterbacks, Larry. And that's where I got in a little bit of an argument with somebody on the comment section. For whatever reason, I think you tagged me. So I saw all the comments to our latest live stream, and I saw somebody like Vish is a Purdy hater, and I got a little bit upset, Larry. But I think that's going to happen a lot this offseason. I can't get upset. But the bottom line is I think that's where I have a little bit of a hesitation, as good as it looked with Purdy and as promising as it is, to just say, hey, the 49ers got a quarterback, the way you're already way out on that limb, the way you were already way out on that limb in August of last year. And maybe
I don't see it as a limb. I don't see it as a limb. I really don't.
Fair enough. And for me,
He's
it's not
doing
that.
it. I mean,
I agree, Larry.
at what point are you going to put down the game program and trust your eyes? Because right now people who are going back to Trey Lance. Now the games are over. And so now they're going back to the program. They're like, 6'3", 240. Really
I'm not
smart.
going back to Trey Lance, though.
I'm just saying that, and I'm not, and this is not a Trey. This should not be a Trey Lance or Brock Purdy thing, really. But I'm just saying there are people that are just losing their mind over if you think that Brock Purdy's better than Trey Lance. It's like, wow, how could you possibly say that?
Right.
I'm watching the games and the practices.
I think that part of it is just inarguable, right? It's inarguable that he proved that he gets to walk in as the starter. He played way too well not to be. But in terms of looking at just Brock's future, Trey aside, in terms of talking about Brock, I do think for me, and ultimately, I think that's my biggest thing with quarterback play. I feel like, especially now, Larry, I feel like a lot of different guys have stretches of play where they show something or show potential. I don't know that the NFL is exactly like maybe 25, 30 years ago, where a bust was Jim Drunkenmiller, right? Now you occasionally have your Josh Rosens and your Zach Wilsons, but even the Mitchell Trubisky's, who are one of the more bigger busts, right, of the last 5, 6, 7 years, had one good season where he made the Pro Bowl as well. So they're able to get one-off production from these guys. And so for me, I feel like a lot of times we diminish just the ability to be consistent and just consistently play at a level for 6, 7, 8 years and start. And somebody like Kirk Cousins who gets disrespected so much, I think that he's underappreciated for the fact that he has consistently maintained this top 15, 14, 13-ish quarterback level, Larry, for 8, 9 years, and he started consistently. It's not easy to do in the NFL. But ultimately, Larry, I know we will be talking about this a lot more. I wanted to bring this up, Larry, because Mark, I think the P is silent. Pfeiffer says Kyle will convert any quarterback into a game manager by imposing his rigid system on them, Larry. I have a strong response to this comment, but you're Larry Krueger. We got to send it to you first. What do you think?
I mean, they were 13-4 with 3 quarterbacks. They won 2 playoff games. They lost the NFC Championship game on the road because they lost their last good quarterback. I mean, come on. I mean, what his system? I personally think Kyle is a good offensive play caller who hasn't had the quarterback. The ball hasn't come out on time. The ball hasn't come out very accurate. He didn't trust Garoppolo. He showed it by how little he let him throw in their Super Bowl run.
Right.
You know, I mean, people wanted to blame Jaquaski Tart, for losing the Ram game. The Niners had 2 offensive possessions after that, and got nothing. And the quarterback just cratered in the pocket and couldn't do anything. So is that the O-line? Possibly. Is it the receivers? Possibly. Is it the quarterback? Possibly. So those are your options, So the criticism of Kyle is just, who do you want? Who's better? Enough of the crapping on Kyle. He won 13-4 this year and won 2 playoff games and came a step away from the Super Bowl with his 3rd string quarterback that none of you said could play. And when I said that he could play, everybody scoffed at me. And now we found out the 3rd string quarterback can play. And now Kyle was expected to beat the Eagles in their place with his 3rd string quarterback, and anything short of finishing the deal. And now he's shit and needs to be shown the door.
I 100% agree. I 100%.
Who do you want?
Agree.
You sound like anybody who wants to get rid of this coach sounds like a petulant child at this point, because it's easy to say, I want to break this. Okay, break it. Now who's going to fix it? Childs break things, adults fix things. Tell me if you want to break it, that's fine. Tell me how you're going to fix it better, make it better. Otherwise, don't tell me you want to break it. Ultimately, because you're going to run to Jim Druckenmiller and Chip Kelly? The 49ers haven't necessarily had this sterling track record of head coaching hires. They've been to 3 of the last 4 NFC Championship games. Are they there yet? No. But yeah. I think it has more to do with their quarterback and some of the personnel decisions. You want to bang on Kyle and say that he swung and missed on key personnel? Go for it. I'm there with you. I'll hold the microphone for you. But this whole, he sucks, they need to get rid of him. And hire who? And that person's going to be better, produce more points. I mean, I don't know. I'm not the whole. There's a big notion, and I get it. There's certain people out there who are anti-blame Kyle. I'm just not in that. I'm just not in that camp. And if that makes me a Niner rah-rah guy because I don't think that Kyle Shanahan should be shit canned, then I guess I'm a Niner rah-rah guy because I don't.
It's not even that.
Who's better? Who are you going to get that's better?
I think I agree completely with you, and I think Shanahan isn't necessarily above criticism, right? He's mismanaged the quarterback situation.
Yeah,
he's mismanaged the quarterback situation in a lot of ways. So there is some culpability that falls on him there. But ultimately, a lot of the failure, I would say, with the 49ers is a quarterback issue, right? We saw how explosive this offense was in 6 games with the quarterback who was operating this offense with timing and accuracy and precision, right? And that's how Brock Purdy operated this offense. That's why you and me, Larry, said he looked like the best quarterback Shanahan has had in 5 years in San Francisco. Now, this particular point about Kyle turning a quarterback into a game manager by quote unquote imposing his rigid system on them, to me, from a football philosophical point, actually isn't a bad thing, quote unquote. Let's say this is true. By imposing his quote unquote rigid system, actually, Shanahan is helping the quarterback. what Shanahan does and why quarterbacks have so much success playing for Shanahan is because Sean Payton talked about this year, right? When he talked about Kyler Murray, he said you want to limit the number of times the guy has to jump off the high board, right? Which means basically that in a game your quarterback is going to have to be Superman 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 times on 3rd and 8 where you got to drop him back and say, hey, go make a play, go read a pass concept, go through your progression, stand tall in the pocket, and go make a big throw. But you want to limit your quarterback doing that because you can't expect him to be Superman every play. So to me, this point is actually really important because the reason quarterbacks have so much success for Shanahan is because he gives them a run game. He gives them a ton of easy schemed up throws off play action, and he limits the number of times they actually have to drop back and be a superstar, right? Like you look at a guy like Josh Allen, Larry. To me, Josh Allen is the exact example of what happens when you don't help your quarterback out. And you say, hey, Josh, just drop back. We're going to drop you back 50 times a game. You're going to have to run it 10 times too. And hey, we're going to have this little RPO game set up. And when it doesn't really work, we're just going to keep dropping you back out of the shotgun. There's no tie-in with the run game. There's no threat of running the ball. They're going to rush 3 and drop 8, drop 9 into coverage, drop 7, drop 8. And you're going to have to go out there and just make big time throw after big time throw. That is actually worse to me than having a coach who has a system and formulates and is able to set up his quarterback for success. So not only was every point you made, Larry, right? This is another just common misconception I see thrown around, like that Shanahan is somehow limiting his quarterbacks by putting them within a system that provides them a run game and so many easy throws off play action. That is what's elevating all of these guys to put up the numbers they're putting up. That's what's elevating Nick Mullins to be with Patrick Mahomes and Andrew Luck in his first 10 starts in passing yards. Nick Mullins, Larry.
Well, I mean, also Shanahan maintains balance and he supports his quarterback by having a good defense. But the balance, I think, in the play action game, in the bootleg game, these are things that should be the quarterback's friend. And when you run it 50% of the time and pass it 50% of the time, and you stay close on the chains and on the scoreboard, you're taking pressure off of the quarterback.
Right.
What puts a lot of pressure on the quarterback is asking what Tampa asked Tom Brady to do this year.
Right.
Just drop back 7 steps behind a squeaky line with injuries and go find receivers that you don't have a lot of reps with and don't have a lot of rapport with. Go for it. And you're 46. That's putting a lot on the quarterback. Shanahan, I look at rigid as, Shanahan will put 5 in the pattern and give his guy, choices, spread the field. I don't know. I mean, there's lots of different ways to look at it for sure, but I don't look at his system as rigid. And I don't know how you would define what you would point to define it as rigid.
So I think rigid isn't in terms of the scheme, right? Because if you call the scheme rigid, you're not watching it because they're constantly pushing the envelope and evolving, right? I mean, the best example was the best example.
I was just going to say, sorry to interrupt, but he asks his quarterback to make efficient throws within a run heavy scheme. Is that rigid? Because that's what's going on.
So I think his answer, and Mark can obviously respond himself in the comments. I don't want to be speaking for it, but I think his rigidity is in the sense that, there's this kind of conception or kind of this idea that Shanahan tells the quarterback, like, on this play, I want you to read it out a certain way and run it a certain way. But every play designer and play caller is asking their quarterback to do that, especially if they have the conviction in the play and the way they're going to run it and how they're going to run it and what they're going to run it against, the way Shanahan does, because he believes he's right. That's just a confidence. And Larry, I think the rigidity, thank you for bringing that up, because this is one of the most evolved coaches in the sport, right? What is Shanahan famous for? The name Shanahan, if you want to say it's synonymous, it should be Alex Gibbs' name, but it is the name Shanahan synonymous with wide zone, right? They run the wide zone. They're a zone running team. The Shanahans, they run that wide zone. They ran more gap this year than they ran wide zone, Larry. They ran more gap. The Cowboys second half, great example. They run duo.
It fit their personnel this year. I wonder if Mark listened to me and Dave Lombardi earlier, because Dave did bring up a point that when Kyle gets sometimes into his game planning at the end of games, or in this case, we were talking about the end of a half,
Uh-huh.
and he's in that middle ground where there's enough time in the clock that he doesn't want to give the ball back to the opponent with a 3 and out, but then he also wants to make sure that if they can, they go for points, right?
Mm-hmm.
And but they're afraid of giving the ball back to their opponent, but they're afraid of taking chances. I think maybe that's what Mark is referring to, because that in that conversation when we talked about, Dave referred to how Kyle came out in a certain series, and he was trying to not let his opponent get the ball back before the end of the half and go score themselves, but he himself was kind of conservative with the early play calls. But
Right.
then once they got a first down, or once his quarterback made a big play on 3rd and 14, like Purdy did, then now he's thinking, okay, hurry up and let's go score some points. So that could be the rigidity that Mark is referring to, and that sometimes in this sequencing of the game planning of, hey, do we want to go for it here? Or do we want to, really go for it and take a chance that we maybe give them back the ball with a minute left at the end of the first half and they can go score? Or do we want to burn clock so they don't? So that balancing act, I think he at times overthinks it and makes it more difficult on his quarterback than it needs to be. And I think, yeah, he said he did. He said, I did, Larry. I think he heard that conversation with me and Dave, and that's kind of a reference to
Okay.
that kind of like, are we going to try to score at the end of the half, or are we going to run it? And then ultimately you ran it a couple times, got into 3rd and long. Now it's on Brock Purdy. They don't want to
Right. To
give it
go
right
make a
back. So now it's
play.
on Brock Purdy to pass. And if he had passed on 1st down, he probably would have had an easier situation. Instead, he passed on 3rd down.
Right.
The situation we were talking about, Brock converted. So then the Niners got aggressive. So I think that's kind of what he's referring to. And I think that's a solid point, that sometimes Shanahan tries to serve multiple masters when he's trying to determine how he wants to handle the clock in the competitiveness of go for it versus be conservative at the end of the first half. I know that was all over the place verbally, but that's what I'm
Yeah,
trying
no,
to.
I kind of understood what you're getting at, and I think in some ways I do agree with that, but I do think that's something that all I don't know if see, I don't know if I look at that particular problem as necessarily a Shanahan problem, because that's kind of a weird spot for all coaches. And the idea is that once you get that first down, you feel like you've taken enough time off the clock where you can start going into your normal, whether it's 2-minute offense or 4-minute offense, just depending on where the clock is. It's really about getting that first down. And I mean, I guess you're right. In some ways, Shanahan can be maybe a little bit more, hey, let's run it on this first play and see what we get, so that now we can play it based on, hey, we got no gain on the run. Okay, 2nd and 10. Okay, let's play it a little
Or
bit
make them use
differently.
their
Right.
timeouts, that kind of
Exactly.
thing.
Exactly. And by the way, he did watch the stream. So shout out to that. They can find that on the Krug show.
There you go.
Andre Rodriguez says, I hate Larry.
Hate.
Jimmy
I
G
love good hate.
win streak comparison to the Purdy streak. Jimmy proved he couldn't play in the playoffs. Purdy did. That's all I want.
Amen,
Sounds like
brother.
he's listened to a lot of Larry Krueger in his life.
No, he's right. He's right. Jimmy's a solid NFL quarterback, but until this year, he turned the ball over tons and he got hurt tons. And it's like he was best known for a guy who was resilient after his own mistakes. Great. I don't know. That's a weird, it's kind of a dubious distinction.
I think Purdy just plays with more instinct and assurance than Jimmy. He knows where to go with the ball a little quicker and a little better with Jimmy, and he just has a better sense of timing. I think he has better feet than Jimmy. If there's one thing, right, he moves much better than Jimmy. But there's JT O'Sullivan, best breakdown of this, right? He always talks about when he breaks down Brock Purdy, the rhythm to his feet. And when you hear any coach in from about the quarterback, it's all the feet. The feet tell you where to go with the ball. And Purdy has unbelievable rhythm to his feet. JT O'Sullivan breaks him to watch. Go check it out there at the QB school. And so he plays with this amazing rhythm to his feet, which leads to amazing timing. And Andre, really appreciate the donation. As always, he also donates again and says, "Love the show, guys. Keep up the great work. Learn a lot." Oh, Andre, you are too kind. This is my Valentine's Day gift right here. Appreciate it, Andre.
I think he's telling us you guys should go learn a lot. No, I'm just joking.
That's definitely possible.
I think Purdy's smarter than Jimmy.
I think so too.
I think he's smarter than Jimmy. I think he's quicker than Jimmy. He's more accurate than Jimmy. I think football's more important to Purdy than it is to Jimmy. I think Jimmy's a guy that wants to get away from the facility. I think Purdy's the kind of guy that is, the kind of guy that would, like a coach, he would live at the facility.
We're going back to your clock reference, looking at the thing.
Dying to get home, dying to get to the facility.
MRCTG, the GOAT. So he's the GOAT. He says, your bias to Kyle Shanahan is pretty atrocious, Vish, but at least he throws in the respectfully. Gotta appreciate him for that. I am biased in some ways to Shanahan. Look, the thing is, like, for example, when I do criticize him, I just feel like nobody is like really caring about the criticism. So, for example, to me, like, I thought the Super Bowl, if they presented one criticism that we can all have of Shanahan, is the fourth down decision making that's so bizarre, that's so confusing on when he goes for it and when he doesn't. It's got to change. You got to be more aggressive. The Eagles have shown that it's really a 4-down game now. You've got to be more aggressive on fourth down. So that's something I would definitely be critical of him. It's just that the reason I always sound like I'm defending him and biased is because a lot of these narratives that you guys present to me is this is what Shanahan does. I can't agree with them. I can't agree when you tell me his play design is great, but his play calling is not good, because to me, his play sequencing is what makes him great. And I can't agree with it when you tell me his system, is too rigid and is not, helping a quarterback, because I think all these quarterbacks are having success because the system is aiding them so much. So if you want to come here and tell me and put in the comments, Shanahan's not aggressive enough on fourth down. Shanahan has sometimes issues with his clock and overall game management. Shanahan has sometimes issues on third and fourth and short, right, with his play calling. He gets into 3rd and 2, and he thinks he can run it because it's a 2-down territory. The running back loses half a yard. They ask him after the game, and Kyle goes, "Oh, he lost a yard, so it wasn't as close as I like, so I just punted it," right? Those are things I can definitely agree with.
Shanahan goes away from what's working. How about that? Shanahan occasionally will have something work, and he'll go away from it.
Absolutely.
Like, as opposed to Andy Reid in this game, had a mismatch, saw something that was working, went right back to it.
Absolutely.
I feel like Shanahan is equal parts ruthless and easily distracted. He's ruthless in finding the conflict defender that he can put tons of pressure on and exploit. And then he gets kind of distracted with all the different other things that are in this offense. And after he guts somebody, he doesn't go back and gut him again.
Right. Or he tries to gut them in a slightly different way, which is pretty play calling. But sometimes, hey, your players are so good, as Juszczyk said during the Cowboys game, hey, we don't need all this movement. They're moving a lot that's causing us to have some bad angles on these blocks. Let's just line it up. They ran a lot of duo. They ran a lot of gap scheme, and they just overwhelmed Dallas with their size, their power, their physicality in that second half.
Yeah. Challenge your players a little bit more to win their individual matchups.
MF is asking if we ever talk DVOA. So I do actually. I'm quite interested. Obviously, I mean, look at me. The advanced metrics obviously make more sense in my head. I do. It's just I found when I quote that stuff in stuff like this, if I quote like EPA per play, a lot of people don't know what I'm referencing, and then it just sounds like I'm giving a bunch of blah 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 numbers. So I try to sort the numbers out and give you my opinions based on what the numbers are telling me. But MF, if you want to start having me come in here and quote DVOA and talk about EPA per play and a bunch of different analytics, I'm totally in for that conversation. I know, Larry, you're for older souls a fan of some of these analytics. I come in here sometimes and you quote them to me.
Oh my God. Well, first of all, analytics it's just information. And to me, it's not necessarily the number of DVOA, because the number in and of itself means nothing to most people. It's not relatable. It's the
Right.
ranking. It's the
Right.
ranking within the league. That's what I find really interesting. But yeah, I mean, to me, I mean, I did the quality control position and I checked it by hand. So I would go through, watch 5 films, translate it into our language, crunch it every way imaginable, and then go back through it, enter it all into the computer, go back and check it. I mean, you're talking about uh, ridiculous hours of commitment to minutia. But yeah, perfecting stats. I mean, that's really what I think the San Francisco Giants do, or have done under their new analytics approach, is that they look at the same spray charts as everybody else,
Right.
except they're looking for the aberration and throwing it out when it's appropriate, and they're perfecting their spray charts. And so that's why, have you ever seen a baseball player these days? I know you don't go to a lot of baseball games, Vish,
Nah.
but baseball players used to, from the dugout, they would look into the dugout and somebody in the dugout, or they would look to their center fielder. Willie Mays would position everybody like this, like a little bit this way, you a little bit that way, like that, just literally with his hands. You can see it in the old films. It went from that to a coach in the dugout, Ron Wotus, let's say, looking at his infielders, giving them signs of, exactly where they want to play, to now they've created cheat sheet cards that are tiny little cards that tell them where to play exactly for every hitter. I've seen defensive replacements run from the first base dugout to left field, get halfway out there, and turn around because they didn't have the card.
I see.
Guys,
Interesting.
that's how important that data is, because that data is telling them where to play everything, that positioning. So, I mean, it's games change. I mean, if the better your data, the better you're just playing the odds.
Right.
Hey,
Right.
he hits it here a lot. I mean, you saw it in the Super Bowl on the Malcolm Butler. You had Brandon Browner, who had played for Seattle. He knew their tendencies. He was all up in the playbook. He had seen this play before. He saw the kind of the little rub route, pick, inside pick. He basically clued Butler to look for it. He told him before the snap, don't go over, go under.
I think you're giving Brandon Browner a little too much credit there. I don't know if you've seen the video where
Supposedly
Patricia
Brandon
and
Browner
Belichick
spotted
talked
it
about it.
earlier in the week that week.
Because
That's what I heard.
no, Patricia and Belichick said that they knew it was coming. They knew Seattle ran it and they'd already coached it. And
No, that's
coached
what I'm
Brandon
saying.
Browner to Giants.
What I had heard was that Browner pointed it out as well in film study, getting ready for
Definitely
that
could
game.
be. Definitely could be. I
That
didn't mean
Russell,
to.
something about Russell liking that that option on that
The
play,
slant flat concept.
right?
Right.
And he would know. I mean, he was there,
Right.
but I mean, guys see it. Guys I mean, there's an advantage to studying your playbook. There's an
Mm-hmm.
advantage to having a great quality control coach. There's an advantage to being a head coach that sits down with your quality control coach and goes through with a fine tooth and comb, you know, uh, exactly every aspect of this thing. I mean, that's where your kind of game plan starts. If you're, the old saying, if your premise is wrong, by definition, your conclusion will be wrong. Well, that's what quality control is. It's about making sure that your premise before you start your game planning is sound.
Right, exactly. And so John Shoup adds to our discussion and he says PFF had a discussion on his play calling versus play design. They said he designed great plays, but also called that had a low probability of success in this situation. So I need to listen to this clip fully. I need some added context. Are they saying low probability of success in terms of choosing run versus pass? Because to tell me that a guy designs great plays, but then those plays don't work is very counterintuitive. Because to me, if you have great design, that means you're calling that play at the right time to get somebody open. If nobody is open, I don't know how you can tell me well designed. I don't
And
understand.
a
I would
lower
love to
prob
hear
and
this.
here's the other part of this I mean, this just reading that, a lower probability than what?
So I think the idea here is that PFF has some metric on run versus pass situationally, and they're maybe going off the probability of that. But then I feel like if you turn that into an analytic, you're then losing some of the pure football philosophy, right? Philosophically, who are we as an offense? Why are we trying to do this? What are we trying to do to set up? And sometimes, Larry, and I know you and I have had this discussion off air, but sometimes what people don't understand, and you know, because you did the quality control job, sometimes you don't call a play for it to exactly work. Sometimes you're calling a play to show a particular tendency and make a defense do something, and you want to see how they react so you can stress a certain rule when you call another play at a different point of the game to actually receive a big gain. And so that's where I feel like this conversation gets a little bit convoluted because, well, we can say, it's 2nd and 8 and some team shows up in a 5-2 front, right? They're giving you a 5-2 front, and on 2nd and 8 it's a low probability rundown, and you run it, right? And you run it with some sort of jet motion coming across because you want to see what that backside defender does if he overplays and over pursues by running down that wide zone play through the backside, so you can flip it to the jet sweep on the next play around. Now that wide zone play might get 4 yards, but you're trying to see something there to see what's going on. So I don't particularly understand this, Larry. And I think there's way more nuance to this conversation than simply putting an analytic on good call or bad call based on, because it goes into what defense you're playing, how the game is going complementarily, how the game is working together in terms of pass run, in terms of defense, and all of this. So yeah.
And also, you got to know, like, your game situation. For example, I used to, when I would be highlighting these takeoff sheets at the end of the game, I would put a red line, right? That would be at the very end of the game, red line on the bottom. But then when I would watch the film again in games where the score got out of hand, and I noticed kind of a change of script, I would take from that point and do a pink line across.
Okay.
And basically what it would tell me is that I would crunch the numbers both ways. I'd crunch the numbers without taking out when the game was over, because when the game was over, now you could be on to sending out plays to try to beat your next opponent. And some
Right.
coaches are like that. Hey, this game's done. Let's start going with these series of plays.
Right.
So you just have to, and you can overthink it as well. Some coaches are real sneaky and real covert and real, incredible. Some teams self-scout themselves to death and are
Do it
keenly
too
aware of what
much.
they do in every situation. Other teams are focusing more on their opponent, and they don't focus quite as intently on their self-scouting. So it's a philosophy.
Right.
You got to kind of know
Right. Some
that's
teams.
why you got to get into the head of the coach, the guy who's on the other end of the thing. That's why certain coaches, they always look at head-to-head records, because sometimes a coach is in another coach's head. And
ultimately
that happens.
ultimately to me, I think it just comes down to finding players who fit your philosophy and are willing to fully buy into it, right? Because we've seen aspects of both these examples work. Like the example you just brought up of sometimes overcomplicating things and being very game plan specific, we see on defense, right? We've seen two different kind of defenses have success in the NFL, right? We see defense come from a strict, like, we're going to rush four, we're going to drop seven, we're going to play two or three coverages, and we're going to play them great. And you know how we're going to play them, right? Like Tampa Bay, Tampa 2. You knew they were going to play Tampa 2. You knew they were going to line up because they know all the Tampa 2s, and they know how you're going to attack them and what they're going to do to stop them. And so, versus, for example, New England, who's so game plan specific in every game, they'll change their fronts, they'll change their coverages, they'll change everything they do. And we've seen both work. It just comes down to, can you find the right players to philosophically buy in? And then ultimately, players go and win the game, Larry. I think that has always been clear to me while watching football, that ultimately players are the people that get the job done.
Well, and in this particular Super Bowl game, the Chiefs, weapons put enough pressure on the Eagles that the Eagles, a lot in the second half, a high percentage of the time, played two deep safeties, and what happened was Kansas City then ran it on them. And when Kansas City ran the ball at will in the second half, Kansas City ran for over 6 yards a pop in this game, but they really ran at
Right.
will in the second half, and they did it largely against split safeties who were
Right.
deep, covering the deep middle. So
Right. And they put heavier personnel on the field, 1, 2, 3 tight ends at times. Get heavier personnel on the field and absolutely run the ball. Well, that was cool to see from Andy Reid. Paul Perryman says, didn't Shanahan grade out worst for not going it? No, not in the analytics. He didn't grade out the worst. He didn't grade out as non-aggressive. Basically, his fourth down decision making when it came down to it in the analytics was what they described. And Ben Baldwin kind of made a joke about it because he put the label as confusing because Shanahan was in the only role. And I've been saying that his fourth down decision making is bizarre because he goes by this weird feel. So like sometimes randomly he'll go for it on a fourth down in a situation that's like, okay, you're going for it here. And it's like extremely aggressive. And then sometimes it'll be 4th and 1 with the ball on the other team's like 44-yard line, right? You're in their territory and he punts it with Wishnowski. So I think confusing is the best description because sometimes he's aggressive and sometimes he's weirdly conservative. But if if you want to talk about a big flaw with Shanahan, I think his fourth down decision making is an enormous topic of conversation. And if you want to talk about holding him accountable on that, I don't think there's enough questions necessarily asked about it, especially in the modern NFL. I don't see any incentive at this point. I think Philadelphia, the Super Bowl showed us a lot, especially if you're playing Mahomes, Larry. If you're playing Mahomes, no matter who your defense is, how good your defense is, like a lot of people are making fun of what Philadelphia's defense is. Are we going to forget that same Mahomes offense came into San Francisco against the number 1 defense in the NFL and put 44 on them in Levi's this year? So ultimately, to me, why I bring that up is not to bring back bad memories for us, Larry. I bring it up to say that in the modern NFL against the Mahomeses and the really special quarterbacks, you can't stop them the entire game. You're not going to stop them the entire game. Ultimately, they will find a way to continue scoring and bring you back and get you at the end. So you have to be aggressive and get points, and going for it and being aggressive on fourth down is really important. I thought Philadelphia, in some ways, Nick Sirianni lost his aggression. 2 fourth downs, he had the opportunity to go for it, and he punted. And was that the difference
where
in the
was
game?
he on
I'm
the
not
field,
sure.
though?
He was on his own 30, but he's gone for it many times in that type of a situation.
And
That's
what was
where it
it,
was a
fourth
little
and
bit.
what, 5, I think?
I think it was 4th and 4. 4th and
Yeah.
4. Yeah.
I mean, I would say this, based on what I've seen, if I were the 49ers, from your own 40 to the other team's goal line, I'm going for it next year on fourth down in anything less than 4 yards.
I agree.
I'm going for it.
I agree.
And the other thing is in addition to going for it, I'm using even if Brock Purdy is my starting quarterback, when I get to 3rd and 1, 4th and 1, I'm putting Trey Lance in there, and I'm putting Juszczyk in, and I'm putting Jason Poe in, and I'm running that Eagle scrum play. And I'm taking Trey Lance, who's already a horse and a really powerful guy, and I'm going to put 2 real powerful guys behind him, and you'll see. And
You like that play?
Yeah, I don't like watching it, but I'll tell you, Vish, I would not be surprised. I mean,
they got to get rid of that, Larry.
When I watch that play, I'd love to know, when the Eagles have run that play,
has it ever been stopped?
What's the average yards gained on that play?
Whatever they need to get the first down, because they don't stop forward progress. Like, they'll stop Hurts, and then Hurts will make a 2nd and 3rd and 4th Sturge and get the first down. And sometimes they run it on 3rd and 3.
What is it on that scrum play? What do they get on average?
I'm assuming 2 or 3 yards.
What if you had a huge, powerful center? Instead of having a 280-pound guy, you had a 350-pound guy who's just leverage McLeverage. You get a DJ Jones or somebody playing center. And then you have got Banks and Burford and Trey Lance. What if you just came out and just said, we're going to line up in that short yardage Eagles rugby scrum formation on first down, and then we're going to go no huddle. We're going to surprise you with it on first down, and then we're going to go no huddle. In fact, what we're going to do too, to really confuse you, we're going to run 4 wides on the field. So I got 4 wide receivers, but in the backfield, I've got Poe and Juszczyk. I've got 4.
You got 6 eligibles.
No, I've got 3 wide receivers. So
Okay.
I'm coming out with a 3 wide receiver look, and I go 3 to one side. I make it look like I'm going up top, but then I put Poe and Juszczyk in the backfield, and you get, let's say you maybe you have some nickel or dime out there because you think I'm going to pass, and then I run my scrum play on first down. I get 3.5 yards. I don't let you huddle up. I just no huddle. I run back to the line. I run that scrum play again.
Doesn't your team get exhausted, Larry?
And then I don't no huddle again. And I scrum play again. And then I get the 4th down. And if I haven't already gotten the first down, I go scrum play again.
I'd do that in the red zone, maybe.
How would anybody stop you if you had the right collection of guys and you had it coordinated? Think about it. These guys barely ever run this play. They run it.
The injuries would stop you.
But I mean, that whole scrum mentality of just power.
Larry, they got to get rid of that play. It's not safe.
It's not safe. Somebody get their legs snapped off.
Right. They're just putting millions of pounds on these interior defensive linemen. And you're talking about leverage, low man wins. They're getting so low to try and get underneath these offensive linemen and push where there's no push. And these offensive linemen are on top of them. Then Jalen Hurts comes on top of that, and then they push Hurts. What I really hate about this play too, Larry, is there's no concept of forward progress. Okay, if it's 4th and 2, Hurts is going to start pushing. And when he gets the first down, he's going to stop. They're going to whistle it dead. So it's basically until he gets the first down, they just let it go. They got to get rid of that play. Oh, my God, I'm so sick of it. It's awful.
Imagine if there was a team that had a big center, a big back, or a big quarterback, or some really strong push guys who could push, and that's all they ran. What if that's all they come out and all they
wouldn't
did?
Make it this season, Larry.
All they did was that.
They couldn't make it this season. I doubt they would even make it a game.
I mean, seriously,
that's a car crash.
Once Josh
play.
Johnson went down, I was thinking to myself, why don't the Niners just do that? They got McCaffrey. Just everybody push and let's see if you can get 10 yards. You got 4 plays to get 10 yards in that scrum. I like my chances, man.
At that point, I was
it would be the ugliest football known to man, and they would change the rules.
At the point that they lost Josh Johnson, I was thinking they should embrace Tony Sperano from 2011 and go full Ronnie Brown Wildcat. But
the late Tony Sperano.
Right, the late great Sperano. Former 49. He worked
once
in San Francisco.
He was a Raider. He was a Raider coach. He might have been a Niner coach.
I think he coached with the Niners at the end.
He might have.
Sports House says, donate for the new microphone Vish bought. Vish actually has had this microphone. I just got a stand, so now you can see it on screen, and I look more professional and official. But the lighting is new. That's why you can see this glow.
Oh, look at that
on my face. Yeah, thank you, Larry. Yeah, I was expecting
lighting.
you. I was expecting you to say. I've been waiting the entire show for you to say, "Hey, Vish, the lighting is looking.
The lighting's
good.
spectacular.
Your face has a real nice glow." I'm sorry you're here on Valentine's Day. I see you with this beautiful glow, and I think you shouldn't be here right now at 10 o'clock at night during Valentine's Day. But that's how life works, Larry. You didn't give me the compliment. I'm here on Valentine's Day. Things happen.
Hey, you know what? You can't. It's the same way in football. You can't force things. In love, you really you got to let it come to you.
Right.
You got to take what the defense gives you. You know what I mean? Seriously. If you're out there looking for love, you'll never find it. But if you let the game come to you, you'd be very surprised. There you go.
Larry.
Yes.
Talk to me. What else you got for me?
Well, okay. I've got my list of and I put a video out.
Okay.
My son's working on it right now.
Out?
Well, on the Krug Show YouTube channel. My son's working on it. I don't know if it's out yet, but it's coming out. And it's basically me making predictions on where all the top quarterbacks are going this
Okay.
offseason. And I'll give you the thumbnail sketch. I'll just give you the cheat sheet. I'll just give you the final answers
Okay.
because I gave reasoning for all of it. But I'll just give you the straight who's going where. I've got Aaron Rodgers to the Jets. All right. I've got Lamar Jackson. A lot of talk about Atlanta. I got Lamar Jackson staying in Baltimore.
Okay.
I've got Derek Carr going to the Saints,
I like that.
reuniting with Dennis Allen. I've got Daniel Jones staying with Brian Daboll and the New York Giants.
Okay.
I've got Jimmy Garoppolo going to the Raiders.
Okay.
I've got Geno Smith staying with the Seahawks.
Okay.
I've got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers wanting Garoppolo, but their cap situation's so ugly because they're taking a big hit on Brady
Okay.
with him leaving that they
Right.
get Baker Mayfield.
Oh, okay.
Baker Mayfield. They've interviewed Todd Monken and Thomas Brown from the Rams, who both have worked with Mayfield. So I think
Right.
Mayfield to the
Monken
Bucs.
is the new offensive coordinator in Baltimore too.
Yeah, that was today.
Yes.
Yeah, that was announced.
Yes.
So maybe they'll hire the other guy. Maybe they'll hire Thomas Brown, who was the Rams' assistant head coach, and he obviously just had Mayfield. Mayfield was probably best this year with the Rams. He was terrible with Carolina. I've got Trey Lance winding up with Tennessee.
Okay.
A lot of people are not going to like that.
No.
I've got CJ Stroud going to the Colts.
Okay.
In a trade up. I've got Bryce Young becoming the new starting quarterback of the Houston Texans.
Okay.
And Will Levis to the Panthers.
Okay.
That's where the top quarterbacks will all go. That's my prediction.
Okay. That's very interesting. I would like to go back through that list because I have a couple of different guesses and maybe a couple of things we can talk about. I'm not going to do the college quarterbacks just because, like I said, I'm a few games through Levis. I have not done Stroud or Young. I would like to watch them all, go through them, get my thoughts down, and figure out which one I like and how I think each would fit and what I think would be their best spots before I give their projections, which we will do actually here on the Vish Kumaran
Show.
Show.
Work to do, man.
I do have a lot of work to do. That's why I'll be up at 5, and we'll move it to 5.
Can't do that on Valentine's Day. It's got to be the day after Valentine's Day.
We'll get 30 minutes extra Z's. We'll be up at 5:30 a.m. tomorrow. Hopefully, we'll get through 2022 for Will Levis. I doubt it. We'll probably get through 1 or 2 games max in the morning. Maybe 1 game max in the morning. But anyway, I like Derek Carr to Carolina. To me, Frank Reich, Derek Carr, I really like that. I think Carolina is kind of in a weird spot because they're not really a rebuilding team, Larry. They paid all those young guys that actually played well for them. They paid Burns. They paid DJ Moore. They're about to pay or maybe not pay Derek Brown. Shaq Thompson got a contract. JC Horn is playing well. They have talent on that football team, Larry. And I think Frank Reich has the ability to have them have success immediately. We saw Steve Wilkes when they embraced the run game. Their offensive line is much improved with Ike Ekwonu at tackle. Taylor Moton's a good player. Their offensive line is much improved. I think they could be a playoff team in a horrible NFC South next year immediately with Frank Reich, who I believe is a good coach. So I think they will be the team that's most aggressive for Derek Carr this offseason. I agree with you.
David Tepper definitely wants a franchise quarterback, though. So if he feels that Carr's it, that's one thing. But I think they're gonna try to get somebody who they think is gonna be epic. That's my guess. I don't think Carolina is gonna take, like, I look at Garoppolo and Carr as kind of like stopgap, but we'll see. That's interesting. An interesting one.
I agree that they're both kind of stopgap in a sense, but I think Carr right now, compared to the quarterback situation Tepper has worked with in Carolina, they've basically swung and missed at every opportunity to get a quarterback they've had. They've just been unable to attract. Carr is, to me, the biggest name they can attract. And they got to be looking at that division and thinking Carr plus Reich, especially Tampa Bay, is a mess right now. They're an absolute mess. They have the cap situation of hell, and they have a aging veteran team of players that were kind of put together to win around Brady, and Brady's gone now. So how are you going to re-put that thing together? It's a messed up situation. New Orleans is still kind of reworking their situation. Their cap situation is still a little funky. They got a few more picks now to work with thanks to Sean Payton, but like I wouldn't be shocked. New Orleans also has a lot of free agents, especially across their defensive line. I don't like their
They're going to lose them
prospects.
all too. They're going to lose almost
Right.
all of
I
them.
think they will. They will lose David
Onyemata,
Onyemata. They will
Marcus
lose Marcus
Davenport.
Davenport. Absolutely. I'm with you there, Larry. And then you look at Atlanta. To me, Atlanta's one more year away. Atlanta's, to me, the team that's going to ultimately be the best team in the NFC West. I love Arthur Smith. I love what they're doing. I like Pitts a lot. I like London. I like that Mariota's no longer their quarterback. Get Arthur Smith some credibility at quarterback. I like some of their young talent on defense. I like their young offensive line. I think Atlanta's just a year away. So if you're Carolina, to me, you add Carr, you win that division. I agree with you, Rodgers. Once he comes out of the darkness, he's going to decide that the Jets is the place for him. I think that's going to be – I'm secretly just rooting for that too, Larry. Aaron Rodgers on the Jets with the way he has become. Can you imagine him every week on Pat McAfee? I would actually start watching that, Larry, because the entertainment would be through the roof.
And Nathaniel Hackett's there.
Right.
Todd Downing's there.
Todd Downing. Robert Saleh, who has a great connection with Matt LaFleur.
Douglas is fired at the end of the year. I think Saleh's fired at the end of the year if they don't win. So they think. I mean, you saw Woody Johnson. Woody Johnson thinks that he's the owner. He thinks they're a good veteran starting quarterback away from a playoff berth. So yeah,
I think so too. By the way, I think their team is that good.
Yeah, but the only thing is Rodgers has operated behind good offensive lines. Now he's going to be operating behind a bad offensive line.
Well, to be fair, the Jets' offensive line had a ton of injuries last year. Elijah Vera Tucker's a hell of a player when he's healthy. He had a great season last year before he got hurt. Becton is a question mark. Laken Tomlinson was a little bit of a disappointment for them. We will see. The one guy also I feel like you're missing in this conversation that they have found absolute value since they got him from Seattle is George Fant. He's been unbelievable for them playing tackle. He's going to come back and be healthy. That's going to help them. So we will see.
What do you think of this trade? What do you think of this trade?
Okay.
Javon Kinlaw to the Jets for Mekhi Becton. Two big guys who need a change of scenery. The Niners need a big, dominant right tackle. They would get that in Becton. The Jets have already Quinnen inside. Now they get another big body monster
Franklin Myers
inside.
as well. I don't think the Jets would do that. They don't need an interior defensive lineman. It's one of the best parts about their football team. They have size and depth there between Franklin Myers and then Quinnen Williams is, Larry, when we're talking about best defensive tackles in the sport, once we cross the Aaron Donald, Chris Jones, Jeffrey Simmons conversation, Quinnen Williams is right there right after them.
Did you say Chris Jones?
Yes. I think he's number one.
Yeah, he is just crazy.
I'll
give Philly neutralized him as well as I've ever seen anybody neutralize him in a big game.
Right. To an extent. The thing with him is that he is so big and he overwhelms you so much with his size that, like, even when you're quote unquote neutralizing him, he's holding up two guys and setting up Nick Bolton to come flying. I thought they did a really, really good job with Philly's run game, as I thought they would, because their defense, I thought the entire season was underrated. They have a young secondary. I think Justin Reed was a massive upgrade for them in the secondary as opposed to Matthew last year, who's completely washed and did not deserve whatever accolades he had gotten the year before. And so, yeah, they're a phenomenal football team. In fact, Larry, the title of the show, and we haven't talked about it for an hour and 28 minutes because the nice thing is you and I just sit here and talk about whatever comes to our head. But the title of this show is actually to talk about how the Niners match up with the Chiefs and where they need to upgrade to match up with the Chiefs. Because, Larry, I know there's been a lot of conversation about Philly, whether the 49ers would have beaten Philly with the healthy Purdy and all of that. But I have major doubts, and I had major doubts before the playoffs because I picked Chiefs over the Niners before the playoffs as my Super Bowl pick. I had major doubts if they would have ultimately been able to beat Kansas City. Especially when I saw the way Wiley and Zeus Brown played in the Super Bowl. They played at a level they have not played anywhere near that level all year.
Wiley gave up 9 sacks, and he totally dominated Hassan Reddick.
Right?
Orlando Brown gave up like 6 sacks, and he dominated on his side. So, yeah,
unreal.
The Chiefs O-line. I mean, the Chiefs O-line coach is Andy Heck. Andy Heck is a former Notre Dame offensive lineman who played for the Bears, who's a terrific coach. And that's where it starts. That's where it starts.
And
Reed's
they
a
have a great
phenomenal
eye for
coach.
it
Heck's a
too,
great
right?
coach. What's that?
They have a great eye for it too. They have such a good eye for drafting and developing the talent. Well, they signed Tooney for big money. They signed Zeus
Yeah.
Brown for big money. We'll see what happens with Zeus Brown's contract, but they drafted Creed Humphrey in the 3rd round. He is, when we're talking about the best centers in football, he is in that conversation. And then the right
He had a
guard,
rough
Trey Smith.
game though. My God, how many snaps were at Mahomes' toes?
True.
He
But
had
he
a
had a
rough
very good
game
game up front
snapping.
blocking. And in general, he's a terrific player. And then the right
Yeah.
guard, Trey Smith, a guy they stole in the 6th round
Awesome.
that was a medical question mark coming out in the draft.
Wasn't he a
Absolute
5-star out of
mauler.
high school? He might have been a
Yeah,
5-star. And he's a
gifted
great
football
player.
player.
And he's a dominant monster guard from Tennessee. And they got him in the sixth round. And he probably should have been a late 1st-round pick.
Yeah.
That was, I mean, that's what the Niners need to do. They need to find, one big time, offensive lineman that's ready to be plugged in.
Right.
Obviously they're good on the left side. So if they could find a more stout center, or if they could find a better, more powerful right tackle, where you could dominate. See, that's the thing. I mean, McGlinchey's a good run blocker. He's a technician. But I mean, if you had a Becton just could cave in the entire side. I mean,
Right. When he's
you can get the
healthy,
most
though.
out of him. Yeah.
Right.
It's a
When
big
he's
if.
healthy. So I actually want to delve a little bit more into this conversation because I think it's interesting. Because the thing that people forget, right, is that despite there being turnover in the front office, right, GMs and coaches come and go a lot, but a lot of the scouts remain employed and they remain constant throughout regimes, right? That's why Philadelphia has this history dating back to Andy Reid, and then it's continued since Chip Kelly with that special offensive line coach they have of drafting and developing offensive linemen. Great. Now they have their misses, right? Dillard, I guess you can classify as a miss for a 1st-round pick that's barely seen the field. Danny Watkins was a massive miss. I don't know if you remember the Mr. Firefighter, 26-year-old or
Baylor? Is that
25-year-old rookie. Yes. No, I thought he was a SEC school, Mississippi. I
Oh,
want to say
okay.
Mississippi State, Ole Miss, something like that. Danny Watkins. Anyway, they took him late in the 1st round. But he's another one they missed on. But generally, they've had magical hits, right? They found an undrafted Hall of Famer in Jason Peters.
Will
Mailata is a
Shields.
top left tackle that they have found out of nowhere. There you go. Will Shields. They signed who's the right guard? Who's the right guard
Brooks?
that was Brandon Brooks? There we go. I was blanking on his last name. They
You're talking about
signed
the
him from
Eagles now. We're talking about
Houston.
the Eagles. I
Right.
thought we were talking about
I'm
Tennessee.
giving an example of them. Green Bay is another example of a team that has culture of finding late round picks and turning them into all pro caliber offensive linemen or middle round picks. The 49ers don't really have that history. I'm trying to remember.
Well, they do
like,
have the history. They don't have it right
in
now.
I meant in don't have a recent history where I've seen them draft like good starters and starters in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th round in the offensive line. But if you want to talk about like, hey, who's their 5th round pick that turned into an all pro left guard? I don't know if there's necessarily there. I mean, you look at their recent history, their best offensive linemen were all high picks, whether it was Staley, Anthony Davis was a high pick. Upati was a high pick. Trent Williams, obviously, absolute bargain trade, but he was the 4th pick in the draft. And he was a top 5 player coming out of high school, too. The guy is a freak of nature, a one-of-one talent, right? McGlinchey, top 10 pick, all of that. So it'll be interesting because, like you said, I do think it would bail out so many of the Niners' problems if they picked one of these guards or tackles, in the 4th or 5th round, and he turns into Jason Kelsey and turns into a 10-year starter, right? The way he has for Philly, or he turns into a, Josh Sitton for Green Bay, or an Elton Jenkins or for Green Bay, or a David Bakhtiari for Green Bay.
I think my sleeper free agent offensive lineman for the 49ers this offseason is Nick Allegretti from the Chiefs. Okay, so this guy was a 4-year starter at Illinois. He was a all-state collegiate wrestler from Frankfort, Illinois. He was an academic All-American. He's only 26. He can play left guard, or right tackle, or center. The Chiefs have used him as a starter at times, but he's kind of fluctuated between starter and rotation piece. What I like about him, and I think it's a really important factor, is when you're a backup offensive lineman, you can only have so many guys dressing on game day. So you need to especially when you have an offense as complex as what Kansas City is running or what the
Versatility.
Niners run, with all the different formation variation, you have to learn 3 different jobs every single week. And so you need to be, to me, a priority needs to be put on intellect. And this guy's incredibly smart. He'll fight you. He's tough. He's healthy. He's 26, relatively cheap. And that's the guy I'd go after, Nick Allegretti.
All right, I will note that down and I will look into him.
Watch him.
I
Number
briefly,
73 for
I
the
remember
Chiefs.
him. I remember him in the draft for
He
sure.
scored a touchdown, I think, on Monday night earlier this year on a tackle eligible.
Oh yeah, I know exactly who you're talking about now. I do remember him before the draft, but I do know they tried to run a play, in fact, to throw it to him in the flat, and Marcus Epps played it really, really well in the Super Bowl where they had him eligible. It was their little ring around the rosy play that they did. Gosh.
Nick
Robert Rathman
Allegretti,
Robert
tough.
Rathman says McGlinchey's got to go. I can't wait for this offseason because McGlinchey will go. Somebody's going to pay McGlinchey a lot of money and he will go.
The
And when we
Bears.
find out that the 49ers can't upgrade at right tackle and they have to settle for a cost-effective option, it'll be interesting to see how the conversation goes because I don't know. I feel like it's one of the most frustrating things to me for me as long as I've done this, Larry, and that's not a long time, but I feel like we can't even have a conversation about Mike McGlinchey. Everything is Mike McGlinchey's terrible. He's the worst player in football. He's this, he's that, he's this. I can't wait till this offseason when somebody pays him a ton of money to show how much they value him as a right tackle.
I'll go further than that. I think both 49er offensive linemen who are free agent, McGlinchey and Brendel,
You
both
think
get
Brendel
paid.
gets money too? Okay.
Who's a Pro Bowl alternate? Plays center. Yeah, someone's going to pay him. And if the Niners are trying to go, El Cheapo on Brendel, then he's probably going to walk. So I that will be interesting. Can like a guy like Nick Sakel or Jason Poe,
Right.
can they
They have
slide into that
guys.
center spot next year?
A Jalen Moore
I think they
maybe
probably could.
sliding into a competing for a right tackle spot, right? He's got the potential.
But
He
I
looked
do
good
like
at
the
left.
Michigan. I do like the Michigan center. If anybody checks out college centers, I mean the best center in the draft is John Michael Schmitz from Minnesota,
Okay.
who's really a good player. I like Alex Forsyth from Oregon quite a bit. They're saying he's going to go later in the draft. But Lusagun Alawatimi from Michigan is my
That's your
favorite
guy.
center. Yeah,
That's your guy.
that's my guy. He's probably going to go
Is
third
he
round.
okay?
Niners
So
have
he's
3
not Cesar
third-round picks. You
Ruiz.
could take it. He's 6'3", 310. He's a redshirt senior. Just he wore number 55. He's just a monster. He's a kid from Maryland. He went to DeMatha, which is a great basketball school, DeMatha Catholic. The guy won the Remington Award this year. I don't know if you saw him. He won the Outland Trophy.
I don't watch college football, Larry.
But I mean, the
I
Outland
think you know
Trophy and
this.
the Remington Award goes to the number 1 center in college football. The Outland Trophy goes to, I believe, either the top interior player, whether it be on offense or defense.
I don't
Olusegun Oluwatimi.
I don't
He's a
like the
grad
college
student.
award
He's a
system,
monster.
Larry. I don't like it. I feel like sometimes they give it to the wrong thing. For example, I remember a few years ago, when Joe Burrow was in college, probably the last year I really, really watched college football. They gave that LSU team, that offensive line with Lloyd Cushenberry in them, the award for the best offensive line of the season. And I was like, did you watch that offensive line all year? They were bailed out by the quarterback 100 times a game. And they won the best offensive line award. So I understand that that's nowhere near the point you're making, right? It has nothing to do with the Michigan center who could be a possibility for the 49ers in the third round. It's just
Oluwatimi, whose brother plays D-line at Maryland.
okay.
This guy started at Virginia, or he started at Air Force, transferred to Virginia, played a bunch of games there, and then transferred eventually to Michigan and was just awesome.
I will check him out. I don't really like doing offensive line in general. I think I've told you about this off air, but I will check him out so we can have a better conversation about him over the upcoming weeks. But Larry, this has been an hour and 40 minutes. Do you want to break our 2-hour streak that we do on Tuesday nights. I think that you've been streaming all day. It might be time to give you a little bit of a rest. What do you think?
Hey, man, I can go all night. I got the
Can
Warrior
you?
game right here. It's 90-89 Clippers.
How's
4 minutes
Kawhi
to play in
looking?
the third quarter. I haven't been watching real closely, but the Warriors are hanging on the road on the second half of a back-to-back. That right there is interesting. Yeah, I mean, I can jump here. If you've got more topics you want to cover, we can cover them.
I did have the one topic covered that we didn't cover, which was, what do the 49ers really need to upgrade this offseason? But I think in a sense, we did end up talking about all the important spots, right? We talked about interior defensive line. We've talked about it before. We talked about the O-line just now, right? You said you believe, I think this is very interesting because I don't see a lot of people thinking that they're going to lose Brendel. In fact, I thought that Brendel would be one of those guys that they might be able to sneak right back. So, Michael Everett says, whatever happens at QB, they need to give him the best protection possible. Do you want to touch on this topic, Larry?
Yeah. I mean, Brock Purdy this year, when kept clean, completed 81% of his passes. What does that tell you? Get Brock Purdy, invest in the interior of your offensive line, build a wall around that guy, and get ready and clean up the Lombardi Trophy in Santa Clara and get ready for a new trophy, because that's all you got to do on offense for the most part is run the same guys out there, improve your offensive line, and find a couple pieces on defense. You're good to go. I mean, the Niners are really, really close, and that's reality. The conference is garbage. There's nobody in the conference. The Eagles were easily their number one competition. The Eagles are right up against the cap, and they've got 12 free agents that are significant, 10 of which are starters. So they're not going to be the same team next year. And then who's the best team outside of the Niners and the Eagles? Who's the best team? Dallas with Mike McCarthy calling the plays. The New York Giants, who look like they're about 2 years away, roster-wise, from really, really competing. Seattle, that's the team. Detroit. I mean, Atlanta. I don't know who. But you know what? Guess what? If the 49ers even stay reasonably healthy, as long as they can, they're going to dominate. They're going to be in that NFC Championship game a lot over the next 5 years. And the way Andy Reid got his, Shanahan's going to get his. And then suddenly the worm's going to turn and everybody's going to go from Shanahan sucks to I've never said that. I would never say that. I mean, people will be backtracking left and right as soon as he wins one.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I think in theory, right, this is fantastic, but I don't understand this, Larry. This idea that there's something I need to get off my chest, and I'm so sick of it, and it's not specific to you. I really appreciate the donation, Michael Everett. I appreciate the support, but I constantly see this. Well, we need to upgrade the O-line. We need to do this. Larry, defensive line talent in the NFL, and I think you would agree with it, is so far ahead of offensive line talent right now. It's not even close. Just about every team has one or two good edge rushers. How many teams have two good offensive linemen? Philadelphia, to me, Larry, was one of the best offensive lines we've ever seen.
They had two elite. They had two of the top five in the league.
They have two guys going to the Hall of Fame.
They got two
That's
all
you need to know. Right. And then Mailata's top 10-ish left tackle. I know the stats, PFF didn't prove it, but the second half of the season when he wasn't banged up, he was pretty strong. And the left guard, Landon Dickerson, is one of the best young players in football. He's an awesome football player.
He was an awesome college player.
Right. And the center they're going to have, Juergens replacing Jason Kelce. Watch out. He's going to be an absolute stud too when Jason Kelce most likely retires this offseason. But this notion that, hey, we can just upgrade the protection, it's just available, it's there, it's hard. There's not that many good offensive linemen in football. Look at the offensive lines at the end of the year at the sport, right? Like, Cincinnati's offensive line stinks. Buffalo's offensive line stinks. Philadelphia and Kansas City, I would say, was only really the two good offensive lines in the playoffs. Of that, Kansas City's tackles Like this is what I hate, right? They put an all-time performance in the Super Bowl. So now we're going to say Kansas City has a great offensive line when Zeus Brown and Wiley were horrible for most of the season. They had a bad game versus Cincinnati as well. They struggled versus Hendrickson and Hubbard the full game. I thought probably
Kansas City
maybe
had a great interior line.
Right. Great interior. The two tackles played great in the Super Bowl, but they did not play that way all year. And then Philadelphia, it's the best offensive line in probably the last 10, 15 years, to be honest. And it's not going to be that good next year. So in theory, right, it would be nice to protect the QB better and all of that. But the modern quarterback is protected by the rules, but in terms of protection and offensive linemen, it's all down, Larry. And then scouting offensive linemen, I know, and the reason I don't like scouting offensive linemen is exactly this, Larry. You see them against inferior competition, and it's so hard to project because guys can look like they're mauling somebody. They're usually come from offenses that has one or two protection schemes, right? They'll either run, a 5-0 protection where you just block the guy in front of you, or they'll have a slide right or a slide left, and that's it. So you're not really projecting what they're going to be asked to do in the NFL because you have about so many different protection schemes in the NFL compared to what you do in college. And then the run plays, Larry. There's no diversity to the college run game with teams, right? They run one or two run plays, and the offensive lineman has to execute the same 2 or 3 blocks. So it becomes so hard to project whether a guy, first of all, has the physical capability because the strength difference from college to the NFL is so different. And then it becomes so difficult to project the scheme and all of that. I'm always wrong at it. That's why I don't like doing it, and I'm horrible at it. But my point is that the college ones even available today aren't that good. Like the opportunity to find these offensive linemen isn't exactly easy. And to me, where the 49ers are financially, Larry, right now, and given who they are as in terms of free agency, like I know a lot of people say just upgrade from McGlinchey. That's not necessarily a possibility, I think, this offseason. There's the tackles better than Mike McGlinchey are locked up. They're on teams, they're signed, or they're coming out in the draft and they're getting picked in the first 5-10 picks like Rashawn Slater was and Penei Sewell was. You're not finding a Mike McGlinchey guy better than Mike McGlinchey, in the 6th round. Most likely you're not. Maybe you do, but most likely you're not. You're probably not finding a guy better than Mike McGlinchey, in the bottom barrel of free agency. It's hard to do. The offensive line talent is so low, Larry. Again, Michael Everett, I really appreciate the donation. I didn't want to seem like I'm coming at you in any way. This just led to a greater conversation that I needed to get off my chest because I see this thrown out all the time. And it comes across as if like other teams are just doing this incredible job protecting their quarterback. Like the offensive line play is so bad across the league. It's so bad.
Yeah. I mean, Kyle obviously puts an emphasis on tackles, and not necessarily on the interior. But I will say, as far as my philosophy on offensive linemen is that, you can, you got to really, to me, I like the guys who are like, one of my favorite offensive linemen in this last draft was the guy that Tampa took, Gadecki, I think his name is, and he played at I think he played in the MAC, Luke Gadecki, and he's just a mauler, tough guy, and to me, I would be that's the trait that I'm looking for is smart and tough. They got to be smart because, you've got Kyle, you run a complex scheme and there's a lot of thinking that goes into it. So you got to be smart, but they got to be really tough.
That's Colton McKivitz. Smart and tough.
Yeah. And also it's like, the tough factor really rules the day because, there's a lot. First of all, you obviously got to be a big body, right? I mean, there is no such thing as a small bodied offensive lineman. They're all big bodied, but then you got to find out, is the guy a big monster or is he a big marshmallow?
Right.
And, and how fit and how durable can he be? And can he play in cold weather? And does he love to play? And does he love to fight? Because
is he Marcus Martin is what you're saying.
What's that?
Is he not Marcus Martin?
Or Kevin or Joshua Garnett.
There we go. There's another one. Bad memories.
Yeah, I mean, or
Chilo Rashal.
Quame Harris.
Stanford tackle.
You've got to make sure that I would rather take a limited athlete who loves to fight than a guy who checks all these boxes, but is kind of not the toughest guy. To me, toughness in the offensive line is like, that's kind of where your whole let's take it to them approach in
Right.
football begins, is
Right.
with your offensive line. And if you don't have an offensive line that even wants to take it to them, what are the odds that you will? So I
Right.
just, to me, I'd rather have some limited mobility and have guys who are tough and can really, because it's a hand fight. It's nasty. It
Right.
gets ugly. And I'd prefer a cold weather, Big Ten type player as well. If
I
I
will
can,
say
if I can find them.
my bad. I will say this. I think that when it comes to toughness, it's clear that the 49ers put a great emphasis on that as well. So I'd assume if an offensive lineman is getting on the field for the 49ers, they will have that toughness. And when you do say that you look for toughness and smarts, Larry, in terms of offensive linemen, Colton McKivitz does fit the build in terms of having both of those traits. He competes his butt off and he knows what to do and he's always assignment sound. And I do think I don't know about what you feel, Larry. I do think that ultimately it's going to be him, some other veteran, and possibly a young guy stuck in this competition to end up being the 49ers right tackle. I think he's got the inside track to be the 49ers right tackle. And my assumption is that he will start 2024 as the 49ers right tackle. And I think at the price they pay him, Larry, he might not be an all pro or a pro bowler, but I think for the relative value, because he's going to be so cheap, he will play well. Because I think, like you said, he's smart and tough, and he's a scrappy, solid player who overcomes his movement skill limitations by being tough and smart.
I mean, I have no problem if they want to spend their money in other places, and go cheaper at tackle, because I think you've got some options. McKivitz is one of them, for sure. And then, it's like, okay, so you got Colt McKivitz. You also have Jalen Moore.
Uh huh.
You also have maybe you could plug in a Zakel at right guard and move Spencer
You love
Burford.
Zakel, don't you?
Oh, I do. He's tough. He's really tough. He's smart. Yeah, so I think Zakel's going to be a starter. And so,
Right.
yeah, I mean, they've got some options there. I mean, like, I'd love to see them re-sign Jimmy Ward, and I want to see the Niners go after CJ Gardner-Johnson, because to me, that guy's just an absolute dog, and he's not old, and the Eagles can't bring him back. And I've seen him be a great player in different schemes, doing different roles.
You think the Niners can afford both him and Jimmy Ward?
I'll say this: I would pay other guys less so I could pay those guys more.
Okay, okay. So
I'd prioritize
you
those
would
guys.
start touching the Armstead, the Kittle, and the Trent Williams contract and start reworking them to clear big space to go get these guys.
To me, CJ Gardner Johnson's a difference maker.
Okay.
And that's what I'm looking for. If you said, okay, what did you take away from the Super Bowl? What I took away from the Super Bowl is you better have an offense that can score 30, or you have no chance against Mahomes and Kansas City and Andy Reid. But the
Uh-huh.
number two thing is on defense, there's no shortcut.
Right.
Mahomes is the best at you can pressure him, but you can't sack him. His sack percentage against his pressure is unbelievable. He gets away from
Right.
pressure all the
Right.
time.
Right.
So what is the way to beat Mahomes? You have to have impact defensive players on all three levels of your defense. And the Niners have Bosa and Armstead, and they could probably use one more difference maker up front. They got Warner and Greenlaw, and I'm a big fan of Marcelino McCurry Ball, and obviously Aziz
I am
if he
too.
sticks around. But they don't really have difference makers in the secondary. Jimmy Ward is one of them, and CJ Gardner Johnson's another. And I'd like to have them both.
I think in an ideal scenario, I'm with you, right? Like I think McGlinchey is going to price himself to a point this offseason that it's not even worth it for the 49ers to me. Like he would be overpaid where the 49ers are better off going the cheaper route. So if we move him aside and then we say let's focus on defense, if you're going to say let's clear space to get one big bite of the apple and bring Jimmy Ward back, I like the CJ Gardner-Johnson idea, but if we're going there, Larry, then I'm looking straight at the edge rusher market and seeing what can I do to bring that secondary pass rusher on the other side of Bosa that's going to be a game changer, that's going to get instant pressure. So I'm looking straight at the Yannick Ngakwe's. I'm looking straight at Marcus Davenport. All these kinds of guys, I think I would look there before CJ Gardner-Johnson. But I do like the CJ Gardner-Johnson idea. It's just when you're talking about game changers, I understand where you're going, but I would rather find a game changer on the other side of Bosa coming around the edge because I think that's missing as much as I think CJ Gardner-Johnson, Jimmy Ward does do a lot of the similar things. Now, if you had both of them, it would be better, but I'd rather have Ward and an impact pass rusher if we're following along the lines of this conversation.
I do love some pass rushers in this draft.
Okay.
That I really love. I mean, there's some obviously Will Anderson at the very top, Miles Murphy, Tyree Wilson. Those guys are all, top 20 picks. Awesome players. Isaiah Foskey's one of my favorite players from Notre Dame. He's going to be a late first round pick. Andre Carter from the second
Andre
from
Carter's
Army.
son.
He's incredible. I mean, you should see this guy for Army. He's 6'6", 250. He looks like Jason Taylor. He's incredible. Right. Nolan Smith from Georgia. Zach Harrison from the Buckeyes. Those guys are, Will McDonald from Iowa State. One of my favorite guys is Jose Ramirez from Eastern Michigan, who's just a crazy edge rusher. And then there's even other guys. I mean, I'll give you a couple other names that are really interesting. Ali Gay from LSU. He's 6'6", he's 250. He was I think a 4-star recruit. They're saying he's a day 3 pick. Thomas Incoom from Central Michigan, 6'4", 265, excellent edge rusher. Cade Hall, whose dad played for the Niners, Rhett Hall, he plays for San Jose State. He's 6'3", 270. He's a tremendous pass rusher.
Larry, you're overwhelming me right now. I had like 5 names on my list of defensive ends that I was going to watch before the draft, and you just said 15 that you liked, so I'm a little worried.
I'll give you one last one.
Gosh.
Tyrus Wheat. You got to check out Tyrus Wheat. He played for Mississippi State. He's 6'2", 260, and really tough to block. He's a grad student, a kid from Louisiana who's just awesome. I mean, for a day 3 pick, I mean, this guy's going to be there on day 3. So yeah, there's some good defensive ends in this draft. You really of all those guys I named, I mean, there's several great ones there, but the guy you really got to go watch is the guy that I mentioned before, Jose Ramirez. Jose Ramirez from Eastern Michigan, who's same school as Max Crosby. And he's a little undersized. He's 6'3", more like 255. But Vish, I mean, this guy's got some serious edge rushing ability.
You said you love his bend, right? That was your thing.
What I love is his ability to flatten it to the quarterback is like this guy skips like 3 steps. He's so athletic. He when he puts his foot in the ground and he flattens down the line. I mean, you're talking about a guy who's just you just don't see it that often. He's really, really good.
Awesome. I'll definitely manage to check him out. The one thing I will say when it comes to a lot of edge rushers, I have not even gotten started watching them, and I'm not playing the
I don't hear you anymore, Vish. Your audio went out. Now your microphone's off. Now I'm not hearing your audio. Oh, now I hear you.
Can you hear me now?
I got you. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, my mic went out there for a second.
It was glitching for like the 10 seconds prior to.
Okay, how am I sounding now?
Well, we can hear you, but it sounds a little different now. Like maybe you've hit a did you hit a different mode? Is there different modes on your mic?
I think so.
Hey, you know what? We're only We're only 1 minute and 15 seconds away from 2 hours.
It might be time to call the show. Larry, thank you so much, as always, for coming on. This was awesome. This was a great show. We'll have to continue our offensive line edge rusher discussion for maybe perhaps next Friday on Mr. 14K Larry Krueger's The Krug Show.
That's right. Well, we're approaching 14K, 13.8, I think. 13.8. Right
so you'll be at 14K when I'm on this Friday, is what you're telling me.
Well, let's see. We might be at 14K right now. Let's just double check. If you haven't subscribed to the Krug Show, please do. 13.877. We're getting close to 13.9.
Make sure you go subscribe there, everybody. Please like, subscribe here. Add a comment. It helps out the algorithm a lot. We really appreciate all of your support. I will be back on Thursday at 6 Central, 4 Pacific with another fantastic guest from the 49ers content creation area and another friend of mine in John Chapman. So make sure you tune in then. Otherwise, I know Larry's got like 8 streams going on a day. So make sure that you've got the bell turned on. You're not just subscribed, you got the bell turned on for the Krug Show so you know when he's going live. Make sure you got the bell turned on here at the Vish Kumaran channel. I really appreciate all of your support as always. And thank you, everybody. And we'll see you next time.